In 2 Corinthians, Paul, with Timothy, is writing his second letter to the church in Corinth. Now remember, Corinth is in Greece. It's in southern Greece. If you come to the bottom of Greece, there's a little isthmus, a little strip of land that goes out to the west, and then there's what looks sort of like an island out there. That's all part of Greece. Corinth was in that little isthmus that connects that island to the rest of the mainland of Greece. And Corinth is still there today. That's where the great big statue of Pegasus is located. I know you've probably sometime in your life seen a picture. That's the horse with the big wings. There's a probably bronze statue is in Corinth, and that's also where the statue of Poseidon is located. That's the big sailor, and he's bronze, I believe, also. He looks that color anyway. And he's standing on the coastline, and he's pointing out to sea like this. You may have seen that picture also in the past, but that's in Corinth today. They've been there for thousands of years, but they're still there, and you can actually go see them. Paul was sort of preparing for another visit to Corinth. The last time he was there, he had some troubles, and the new church in Corinth had some troubles. So he decided that he would write them a second letter. We're in 2 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, of course, was the first letter. It's belief that there were actually 3 letters. That the 2 in the Bible are the first and the third. The second letter is lost, and no one knows what it said or where it ever is. But the ones that are in the Bible are called 1 and 2 Corinthians. During his past visits there and talking to the people there and the messages back and forth, he knew the church, just like all the young churches, he knew the church was having some problems. In 2 Corinthians, Paul gives a powerful testimony of his faith and his love for those people. He's telling them how much he cares for them, how much he loves them, and he's telling them also about his struggles as a missionary and forming other churches in other places. And he also talks about some very deep theological truths, some of what we're going to look at today. But he also tells them that stay strong, God's Spirit will transform you as it had him. And that's the main message in 2 Corinthians. Now, today we're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, and Chris is going to read that for us now.
We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed.
You need to remember, Paul's writing this to the church in Corinth, a church that's had problems, continues to have problems, internal conflicts, pressure from outside. There were a lot of things going on there. And he's telling that church in these 2 verses 4 things. And we're going to look at each one of those 4 statements, each one of those 4 things in a few minutes. But he's describing his life and going through things that have happened in Corinth and what he wants to happen at this new church. The church in Corinth was probably created between 35 and 40 years after Jesus' ascension. One of the earlier churches that Paul established. So it's a new church. You know, that's not that long to get something like this going and started. They didn't jump on a plane and fly somewhere and plant a new church. You know, it was a long way from Jerusalem to Corinth to Rome. It took them a couple of years to get there, you know, so 35 to 40 years is a fairly new church. It's a new religion also. These people did not know what Christianity was. This is something that was new to them. So you can imagine getting that started, that there would be people that would oppose it. There would be people that would try to put pressure on them to abandon this new religion, to stop creating these new churches. You know, y'all need to go back to the way it was. Go back to the old time religion that they had back then. You know, not this new stuff. You know, they wanted people to worship kings and worship Caesars and worship some of the gods that they had that we think of in mythology today. That's who they wanted to worship. They didn't want to worship this one person. This new religion, it was something new. You think about that. If we were to start something brand new, whatever, a business, another church, it would be difficult. And there would be people that didn't want you to do it. There would be people that wanted to knock you down, to stop you from doing that. Well, that's what was going on. It was this new religion. It's sort of like the birth of a child. Something new. Something that's going to change your life. Something that's going to take your attention. Something that's going to require love and nurturing to continue to grow. This beginning of this new religion was a lot like that. I read something a long time ago, and I thought about it in doing this, and I was able to find it about the birth of a child, and I want to read it to you. This is it's sort of morbid, but I want to read it to you because we're talking about the birth of a new church here. But this is what it says. The moment you are born, your death is foretold by yourselves as your mother holds you up, then hands you to your father, who gently tickles the stomach where the cancer will one day form. He studies your eyes where melanoma's signature is already written on the optic nerve. He touches your back where your liver will one day house the cirrhosis. He feels the bloodstream that will sweeten one day into diabetes. He admires the shape of your head where the brain will one day fall into stroke. He hears your heartbeat, which, exhausted from the fearful ways in life that it's lived, will one day explode in your chest, taking you out of this world. Death lives in each one of us and begins its countdown on the day we're born and makes its rough entrance at the last hour. Paul did not want this new church to be that way. He didn't want the new church to start with all these problems. He wanted them to be prosperous and to grow and to not have all these negative thoughts internally and negative influences from the outside. That's not what he wanted for that church, not what he wanted for this new religion. He didn't want the new Christians to have negative outlook. He didn't want them to have all these problems that our bodies have, like the birth of a new child. They probably thought it was going to be a rough beginning, and it was. Things did not go well at first. Paul mentions 4 things in these 2 verses that Chris read. He said, you have been hard pressed, but not crushed. He says, you have become perplexed, but you do not despair. He said, you would be persecuted, but you'll never be abandoned. And he said, there will be those trying to strike you down, to knock you down, but you will not be destroyed. Paul's telling them these 4 things. The first of the 4 things. You'll be hard pressed, but you will not be crushed. In verse 7, before what Chris read, is the verse in the Bible that has the phrase, jars of clay in it, like the band. That's where they took their name from. And he's talking about, jars of clay back then were very fragile. A little bit of pressure and they would crush, and they would be gone. They'd be worthless. And that's what he's telling the church here. As a church, you will be hard pressed, but you will not be crushed. Have we as a church been hard pressed? Oh yeah, I think we have. We had preachers that were sent here before to close our doors. But they didn't crush us, did they? We're still here. We're still coming to church and having service and holding communion and welcoming new people. They didn't crush us. But we have been hard pressed. Then Paul goes on to tell them, you've been perplexed, but did not despair. Perplexed means confused, simply put. You were confused. You really didn't know. What should we do? Have you ever been confused about things of faith? Sure you have. Life has a way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect them. But you know what? The person that has studied, has practiced, and keeps his eye on that ball will be able to knock it out of the park, no matter how hard that curveball is thrown at you. If you're ready for it, you can knock it out of the park. So we never worried about a little confusion either, although there's been confusion. The next thing Paul says, they had been persecuted but not abandoned. Now this is important in the life of a church. Christians have always been persecuted. This is probably the most important of the things that Paul told that church in Corinth. You have been, you will be persecuted, but you are not abandoned. You're not by yourself. No church is by itself in anything it chooses to do in the name of God, because he will never abandon you. And all Christians have been persecuted. We still today, there are factors and influences coming in all around us that are basically trying to persecute Christians. And you think about some of the things that are happening, like violence toward Christians in Nigeria and other places. You think about abortion, alternative lifestyles, the removal of God from our schools and our everyday life. Television, movies, and shows that now dictate how people act and talk, and there's so many things. Those, to me, are all methods to persecute the church. If you look back to the invention of television, is when the family unit started going down. When everybody got a TV in their house is when the family unit started falling apart. It's also when morals and all of these other things started coming into our lives. I believe that. And if you really do your studies, you would probably believe the same thing. All of that is persecution of the church. But the church has never been abandoned. And this church in Corinth would never be abandoned. That's what Paul is telling them. I don't care what people say and what's going on and what's happening in this world today. There are still many, many more Christians than there are non-believers. You may read stuff that tells you that's not true, but it is true. There are more believers in God than there are non-believers, especially those that have problems, especially those right before they die, or something's going really, really wrong in their life. They'll turn to God when they never have before, because he will never abandon them. And that's exactly what Paul was telling these people in Corinth. And then he tells them, you'll be knocked down, but you won't be destroyed. So much that's going on today attacking the church is trying to knock the church down. 1,000 people sued the Catholic Church. The Boy Scouts got sued, even though it's founded on Christian beliefs. There are forces trying to knock down the church. But we, as Christians, as true believers, cannot be knocked down. People are trying, and let me tell you, they will not stop. The evil forces are here, and they will continue to try to knock down the Christian church. It starts off as a rain, light rain, and then it becomes a thunderstorm. And before you know it, it's a flood, like the 1,000-year flood in Kerr County in Texas last year. Mike Tyson once said, y'all know who Mike Tyson is, the boxer, rough guy, learned it in prison. He said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. If you live long enough, you're going to get punched in the mouth more than once. Maybe not literally, but somebody trying to knock you down, to take you out. Sometimes you'll see that blow coming, but more often than not, it'll come out of nowhere, and it may knock you down temporarily. We do get knocked down as Christians. Our children get sick. We get sick. Get laid off. Recession tears up your 401k or your HR, your savings accounts. The chemo may not work when you got cancer. You may end up in divorce court. Those are times when we get knocked down as humans, but especially as Christians. We know that we're going to get knocked down. What then? We're going to get right back up. It's not going to take us out. We're not going to be, as Paul put it, destroyed. But we do get knocked down. People judge us and our Christianity and us as Christians mostly by how we react when those bad things happen. how you respond when something bad happens. Do you go into this stream of curse words? Do you start fighting back? Or do you bow your head and pray? That's how people judge Christians. A lot of times is how you react when bad things happen. This is a great passage from Paul. I think it's some of the greatest stuff that he wrote. And he wrote a lot of the New Testament. Because he's telling us, are we under pressure as Christians? Yes, we are. Do we get confused sometimes about our faith and our Christianity? Yes, we do. Do we face harsh criticism? Christians everywhere do. Do we get knocked down sometimes? Yes, we do. That's life. That's reality. That's the truth for every follower of Jesus Christ. And if you think any different, you need to go back to the preacher that brought you into this church thing and start over. Because that is the reality of life and the reality of being a Christian. We will be knocked down. We will be under pressure. We will get confused. We will have harsh criticism. That's being a Christian. It happens. You know, too many Christians want life to be like the Disney World ride, the Pirates of the Caribbean. Y'all been on that, where, you know, you're going along and the pirates are on each side with their sharp swords. And they're not acting like they're going to come to you, but they never really do they? You just ride along, you have this nice ride, and at the end, you're okay. None of that dangerous stuff even gets to you. Well, that's what Christians want their life to be. But it's not that way. We get knocked down. It's like they want it to be just a thrill to ride, but when nothing really goes wrong. Life's hard. As Christians, we face danger and persecution and criticism and pressures from all corners everywhere we go. I know that I'm under pressure a lot. I get confused. People attack me, and I've been knocked down. It happens. It'll happen to you. If it hasn't already, I'm sure a lot of us it has in here. Maybe younger ones, it hasn't happened to you yet, but it will. But when that happens, that's when the power of God shows up. You will not be destroyed because you are not abandoned, because God is always with you. The power of Christ, the power of God is there with you, and you will have victory over those troubles. But you know, to have victory, you have to have a trouble, right? You can't say, I was victorious unless you were battling something, right? Well, that's the way God teaches us. He gives us these trials. We have victory over them because He's there with us, and then we can say we were victorious. You can't have victory unless you first have a trouble. That's a different way to look at it, but it's true. You know, people want their Christianity to be like the buffet down at Panda. I'm going to go through and take what I want. You know, give me a little bit of criticism, but no, I don't want that. I don't want that pressure over there, and I don't want this. You know, I'm going to pick what I want, but it's not like that. We can't pick what happens to us in our lives. In preparing for this sermon, I kept thinking about this song called Tub Thumping. It was a British rock band in 1997 called Chumbawamba. And in that song, they say over and over, I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never going to keep me down. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. I guess those guys from Chumbawamba had God on their side because they kept getting up in that song. I think they say those two sentences 43 times in that song. But that's us. We as Christians get knocked down, but they're never going to keep us down, because I've read the book of Revelation. I know that we win in the end, right? But we may be down now. But by God's grace, by the grace of God, though we are hard pressed, we will not be crushed. Though we may be confused, we will not despair. By the grace of God, may be persecuted, but He will not abandon us. And by the grace of God, although you may be knocked down in life, you're not knocked out. You're not crushed, you're not in despair, you're not abandoned, and you will not be out of this life of Christianity by the grace of God. And if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior and you keep Him on your side, that's what it's all about. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. That, folks, is amazing grace. Amen.